Welcome to the first episode of SEXploration, a podcast which talks about sexual and reproductive health and rights based in our country. Today, we're going to talk about topics like rape, statutory rape, and we're also here to talk about consent, the idea of grooming, and its differentiation from guardianship. For this, the guest today we have is Mr. Subin Mulmi. Mr. Subin Mulmi has been a very active researcher and advocate of human rights law, and he's today with us to join on the podcast and tell us a lot of things that we have to know about these concepts and how it has been taken in different perspective in Nepali society. So welcome to the podcast, Mr. Subin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so first of all, I would like you to give a brief introduction about yourself and about the works that you've been doing in this field and how it has been bringing out a change in the Nepali society.
Not sure if I can sort of say that there's been change in the Nepali society because of my work, but I've been working in this field for 7-8 years now. But I started from Forum for Women Law and Development, or FWLD, which is a non-profit organization working on the rights of women and marginalized groups. And I used to work on different rights of women, particularly citizenship rights of women, and also worked on other issues of legal identity. I was also a part of a few human rights campaigns while I was working there. I took a break and I went for my master's program, and I did my master's program on gender studies and human rights. As a more sort of feminist studies and sort of brushed up my academic knowledge as well. And then since then, I worked for a brief while in Jumla Pani as a gender and social inclusion advisor for Mercy Corps. And then I'm working at Nationality for All Money organization, which is an organization which is a Asia Pacific organization on citizenship and statelessness and right to nationality. I've been in this position for the last 1 year. But throughout these years, I've been involved in different campaigns on like not just human rights campaigns, but also social justice and human rights, social justice and feminist campaigns as well. I've learned a lot from those campaigns, from the amazing campaign leaders. That's why I guess in a way I also identify as a feminist, and I definitely sort of try to incorporate intersectional feminism in all my writings and all my work as well.
That's amazing to hear about. And now let's just get into the topic and let's talk about rape, because rape in general has a different perspective. I know legally when we talk about in general societal perspective, we see a lot of differences. So what exactly do you think would be an appropriate way to, we cannot define it, but a way to describe rape cases?
It's very difficult, like you said, and it is very complex. Rape and all forms of sexual violence or sexual misconduct, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, sexual harassment, these can be very triggering for many people to just listen. A legal perspective, there is a definition for all these different terms that I used. Nepalko context it is engaging in a sexual act without the consent of the person. So these are beats sexual relationship, a sexual act. If there's no consent, then that becomes rape. But that's the simple definition of it. There are other sort of complexities surrounding it as well. There are times when consent is become blurred, when there is position of power, when there is use of alcohol or drugs, or when there is the relationship between the two persons. There's one is a guardian, or one is a someone within the blood relationship. So there are other complexities that comes with this definition. But all forms of sexual violence or misconduct, it is very difficult to define. Khali consent nabhayeko sexual act is rape or sexual violence. That's the simplistic way to look at it. But I'm sure we'll discuss the complexities around it today.
Yes. So when we talk about rape, the other thing that comes into our mind is also statutory rape. And it's a very blurred line between rape and statutory rape. When we talk about हाम्रो Nepali society को concept मा चाहिँ there's not much difference and people are not much aware कि there are types of rapes and statutory rape comes under a completely different umbrella. So if you would highlight a little bit about the difference between rape and statutory rape.
Yeah, it is like you said, they are different.
Yes, they're
and I have
different.
to be very careful when choosing my words because the political context, the social context we are in at this point of time, and rightly so, it is very sensitive.
Yes.
So, मैले legally right कुरा भनिरहेको होला, but that I don't want to offend anyone when I say this. The person, the survivor who has faced this, who is facing this and who has been facing this for a long time, who has been suffering from this trauma, who has been trying to heal from this, I hope they don't sort of feel offended or this does not add to their trauma. But legally, say, rape and statutory rape are different. Ani, the gravity of the crime in terms of punishment ko case ma is also very different. The other term that I'm sure we'll discuss is grooming.
Yes.
So that which would be applicable mostly अब statutory rape मा applicable हुने कुरा छ, but नेपालमा चाहिँ specific कानुन छैन त्यसको.
Yes.
तर नेपालको केसमा पनि statutory rape भनेको चाहिँ there's consent, but the person is a minor. जोसँग sexual act भएको छ, the person is a minor. So minor को केसमा consent भए पनि that is considered to be statutory rape, not rape. That is considered to be statutory rape. It is very important to use the term statutory भनेर त्यो word पनि use गर्न जरुरी छ. From a legal perspective, from a very legal perspective, मा त कुरा गर्दैछु. We are using it interchangeably. Activism मा, advocacy मा, which is fair, which is very strategic. Because statutory rape को बारेमा धेरै कुरा नै हुँदैन. अनि unless we use the term rape, only then people get serious and start talking about it.
Yes.
So there is strategic value in using the two terms interchangeably, but unfortunately or fortunately, the law looks at it very differently. Because there's the other side of the again, I'm not going to say the other side of the argument. I'm not justifying anything, but feminist movement in the world is also advocating to reduce the age of consent because in other countries, especially in Western countries, might say, men or women are become sexually active from a young age.
Yes.
So to sort of control their bodies, to control their sexuality is also not right. One is a discourse that is happening elsewhere in the world as well. But that is a different context. For those are countries where maybe grooming or sexual violence is less common compared to our country. So is it applicable in our country? It's a different conversation. But that's why it is kind of important to distinguish between statutory rape and rape as well. And this is where I think, like, I will probably talk about it as well, where grooming ko kura auncha. So if there's consensual sex between two 16-year-olds or two 17-year-olds, then would both people be punished? Or Nepal ko case ma men and boys like say sex rape huँदैन भन्ने खालको परिभाषा छ. So the boy जुन छ उ त परेन, but जुन केटी छ हैन, the girl को केसमा त rape भयो, statutory rape भयो. So त्यो 17 वर्ष, the boy can also be 12 वर्षको, 13 वर्षको. So 13 वर्षको boy and 17 वर्षको girl भन्ने position of power हेर्यो भने त त्यहाँ त opposite छ नि त.
Yes, the girl.
So त्यो कुराहरु चाहिँ define भएको छैन. But having said that, when there's a massive age gap, so that's why other countries मा चाहिँ age gap तोक्दिएको हुन्छ के. So 2 वर्षको age gap, क्यानाडाको केसमा अरू countries मा चाहिँ 2 वर्षको age gap तोक्दिएको छ for 14-year-old for till they attain the age of 18 भनेर. So after 19 चाहिँ statutory rape हुँदैन, but 14 or 17 भयो भने irrespective of their gender, that is rape. That's statutory rape, sorry. But 14 and 16 भएछ भने consent छ भने that's not rape. So or statutory rape. So the conversation is important, but in a country like ours, with that caveat, in a country like ours where त्यो खालको concept मा हामी पुगेकै छैन मैले.
Yes.
अहिले sexual freedom को बारेमा हामी कुरा गर्दै छौं, तर त्यो सँगसँगै सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्सको त्यो सँगसँगै भने त्योभन्दा अगाडि सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्सलाई मिटिगेट कसरी गर्ने, सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्स सर्भाइभर्सहरूलाई कस्तो खालको सपोर्ट दिनुपर्छ, यस्तो मुद्दाहरूलाई कसरी सेन्सिटिभली अगाडि बढाउनु पर्छ। अहिले पनि कतिजना सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्सको सर्भाइभर्सहरूले जस्टिस पाउनु भएको छ। त्यो कन्भर्सेसन यो स्टेप नै हामीले पार नगरिकन त्यो कन्भर्सेसनमा कुरा गर्ने कि नगर्ने इट्स प्रब्ली द क्वेसन। Let's stop here.
So when we're talking about it, you did mention something जुन मेरो दिमागमा नि it was for a long period of time, the age gap, होइन, like 16 and 17-year-old having consensual sex in a lot of countries is like accepted and not legally obliged to any sort of punishment. So it comes under, if I know, Romeo Juliet Law भनेर. So there is an applicability of Romeo Juliet Law in some of the states in US, some of the states in UK, if I'm not wrong. And when we talk about it, the main motive is it looks like they did it in order to mitigate the punishment that could be happening for statutory rape if both of them are between a certain age gap, which is not a vast difference. Right? So we're talking about it in the context of Nepal. Right? How do you think, or do you think it is appropriate for something like that to be applicable in Nepal as well, with our society's dynamics changing and a lot of people, a lot of teenagers being sexually active from a age of like 14 and 15. So when the dynamics is changing, do you think it's appropriate to have something like that applicable?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, we shouldn't undermine the sexuality of human beings, and especially the sexuality of women. And for the fact that if they are sexually active from a young age, that shouldn't sort of be seen as something that needs to be policed for their protection. But on the other hand, recent cases there have been so many cases of grooming, there have been so many cases of sexual abuse and exploitation. So maybe this is not the right time, but it's probably the other side of it. And if we also go outside of the urban spaces, again, I'm not stereotyping that urban spaces by women aren't, or girls aren't sexually active from a small age, but there is lesser access to justice, lesser access to special justice in the case of sexual violence, where many cases go unreported. Reported cases fair trial so we just don't have the right institutions. We don't have like proper institutions to ensure that the survivors get justice, the survivors get protection, and there's like compensation. So the process we need to keep having these conversations. But यो जुन अहिले age gap को नियम बनायो भने यस्तो गर्न थाल्यो भने चाहिँ because there are predators and the sadly predatory behavior menहरुकोमा चाहिँ सानो उमेरदेखि पनि देखिएको अवस्था पनि छ. The society is highly patriarchal. The power difference between men and women is vast compared to many other countries. So 16-14 or 18-16 को केसमा पनि, even though it's just 2 years, but men still benefit from so many privileges. So त्यहाँनिर त्यो सानो उमेरमा नै manipulation गर्न सक्ने, सानो उमेरमा नै exploit गर्न सक्ने सम्भावना पनि देखिन्छ. So like I said, it is a double-edged sword, and unless we know clearly, we have legal safeguards in place, like okay, age gap racket, and what are the consequences, what are the risks for women and for young boys that can happen, and this legal safeguards are the key. So this to bhaya bhane ke ta support system cha chaina अहिले हामीसँग, rehabilitation centers हरु पनि सरकारी हिसाबले त छैन नि त, अरु NGOs हरुले खोल्नु भएको छ. So psychosocial support पठाउने खालको legally mandated कानुन त नियम त छैन. So त्यो सबै नहुन्जेलसम्म अनि यसको consequences नबुझेसम्म चाहिँ just because it happened in other countries, we shouldn't be doing it without a proper assessment. Just like someone
So we're on the topic of consent, and when we're talking about consent, there are a lot of things that are blurred. Katiwata clearly mentioned gareko huँदैन, but then for somebody it's a consent and for not. But अहिले आएर, because of all the feminist movement and the activism that's going on, a no means no, and simply an enthusiastic yes is a yes भन्ने concept आयो हैन. But there are instances, like of course you've seen a lot of it because you've been advocating for long, where a person or a perpetrator, even when he's standing in the court, ulai lagira huncha ki what he did was correct, and he does not know that he raped her. And when that's happening, even after the verdict's done, and then he's like finish his sentence or whatever compensation was given, and he's come out of it, त्यसपछि पनि there's not much difference in the way he thinks or the way he actually perceives the society and the concept of consent. So at यस्तो खाली सिनारियोहरूमा चाहिँ like terms like asking for it or saying something like under influence, both of them were there, or something of that sort, you know. Do you think there should be a certain level of policing or a different level of some provisions that has to be made that could actually guard this and literally like reduce the level of misconception that's happening around the topic of consent in the society?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a very sort of different take on this, and this probably doesn't abide by many other human rights standards of maybe other countries, but I think we need to have a more stringent stand when it comes to sexual violence and rape, especially because like you mentioned so many examples of you know the perpetrator feeling entitled to having sex or entitled to sort of having power over the survivor.
Yeah.
So, and which recent cases are many the sort of the relationship spans for a long time, and they still feel entitled, and they still feel she was asking for it, or she was also interested in it. So, these cases, like, I mean, consent, obviously, you mentioned this binary or a spectrum between no means no and an enthusiastic yes. But this पनि कस्तो छ भने enthusiastic yes under the influence of alcohol. Enthusiastic yes when there's position of power or difference, subordinate or superior छ. एउटै same office मा or same workplace मा or like even same घरमा, like there's a position of power and there's enthusiastic yes. Both of them are adults. So त्यस्तो केसमा पनि there's possibility of sexual exploitation and abuse. So यस्तो केसेसमा चाहिँ it has to, there needs to be a lot of awareness that needs to happen. This needs to be a very common conversation. Consent needs to be a very sort of a sort of table room discussion, or gives a dinner table discussion हुनु पर्छ. But at the same time, the like social side of it when it has to be a conversation. कानुनले पनि त्यसलाई राम्ररी डिफाइन गर्नु जरुरी छ. So position of power, same household, influence of alcohol, influence of drugs, guardian role मा भएको मान्छे, mentor role मा भएको मान्छे, even though every workplace मा नहोला, teacher and student co-relationship भएको मान्छे, or intern, teacher and teaching assistant. Yes. So the different categories clearly delineate गर्न जरुरी छ जस्तो लाग्छ. And then these are the instances where consent can be blurred भनेर राम्ररी distinguish गर्नु पर्यो. And each of them needs to have a separate procedure पनि. When if there's a prosecution going on, the prosecution गर्दाखेरि पनि separate procedure, separate evidentiary requirements हुनु पर्ने एउटा भयो. And the other side of it, I'm guessing you were planning to ask this question about like proving guilt or proving offense. But your topic ma consent ko kura bhayera, maybe I just want to add to this as well. Is अहिले पनि burden of proof the accused ma cha.
Yes, it's true.
So in cases of sexual violence, I think the burden of proof needs to be on the perpetrator to prove that they are innocent. Yes. Trafficking case is an example. So their confessions, or not, sorry, confessions not the right word. They're the sort of the survivorले भनेको story जुन छ, survivorले भनेको be it on social media or be it everywhere, then that sort of forms the basis. Survival story is the strongest basis for accusation, and then the accused has to prove their innocence. It has to त्यो भयो भने बल्ल, I think हैन बल्ल भयो, and that's a very strong stringent measure, and I'm sure many countries or many human rights activists may not agree with this, But त्यो भयो भने बल्ल I think men or perpetrators would be like, they'll think like 10 times.
Yes.
That, oh, is it an enthusiastic yes? Are you under the influence of alcohol? Because the onus should be on men.
Yes.
The onus should always be on men. Women shouldn't be like, oh, like rati yati basiरहेको should I go? Or like, oh, मेरो boss, will that happen? The onus should be on men to think like 100 times होला before engaging any sexual act. Like, oh, is she okay? Is she feeling good? Is she saying yes? Or is she all right? 100 times they have to sort of keep thinking, and that should be, there should be trust building the healer subway. Is she benefiting anything from me, or like am I sort of, is she looking for something in return? Then a transaction when I said, then positional power ma the men the perpetrator mathi bhayo.
Absolutely.
So त्यो भयो भने मात्रै I think will understand, men will finally understand that the spectrum. त्यो डर नभएसम्म I don't think like we can have strong laws and everything, but the evidentiary burdens is अब accused मा राखिदैन. तबसम्म I think we can have conversations and consent. We can try to dive deep. There can be awareness, but त्यो any law about, we shouldn't be making what's called deterrent laws बनाउने age गइसक्यो भन्छ. We should be reformative. There should be more discussion on patriarchy and all of that. That's very important. But at the same time, when it comes to such a sensitive issue like sexual violence, which gives someone lifelong trauma, and very few people recover from it completely, and it sort of stays with the person all their lives. So in that case, I think we have to have this very stringent measure.
So while we're talking about having measures, I know हामीले भन्यो कि like consent को लागि भने there are certain provisions has to be made in which we clearly mention that a person with an authoritative figure, whoever is there between the two partner, they are not allowed to do something of the sort that's going to give them trauma or potentially sexual violence. There are some provisions as such that has been, if I'm not wrong, that has been adopted यो topic मा चाहिँ abroad in different states, in which even under the law that I mentioned अघि, Romeo and Juliet Law or any of those laws are exceptional to the cases in which one of the partner is an authoritative figure. So I rightly believe with what you said, and I also think that when we're talking about provisions and we're talking about bringing out changes in the way the onus should be upon the man or the women in any of the cases in which there's male violence, there are also very less provisions that are mentioned for marital rape. And rightly, like being a law student myself, एउटा कुरा that I was very not satisfied the first time I heard it is there is no sexual harassment cases for marital rape, but there are only cases in which the actual penetration or let's say rape happens, which is a very strange and unfair thing to talk about, and also a very unfair thing from a general perspective, because someone could be a victim who's been suffering a certain level of harassment every day, but it just comes under harassment and there's not much specified and specifically made in order to bring out a cure of the certain issue. So do you think there should be any those sort of provisions that has to be amended so that the cases of sexual harassment under marital rape also comes into the eyes of the public and also addressed in certain way that it prevents such events from happening further?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think I missed that as well. I think marital rape is very serious.
Yes.
It's very serious because our case maybe the proximity between the perpetrator and the survivor may not be, again, it's I'm just talking generally. So they may not be in the same the proximity may not be the same. Like they may be in different places. But marital rape, they are in the same place all the time. There's even more risk of continuous cases of rape.
Yes.
So which is generally the norm when you marital rape. It sometimes happens every day, or sometimes happens more than once in a day. So त्यो केसेसमा झन् there needs to be strict measures, a strict कानुन, तर हाम्रोमा चाहिँ punishment झन् half जस्तो गर्दैछ marital rape मा. So which is extremely unfair. अनि marital rape को केसमा पनि like again evidentiary कुराहरुमा पनि it's very difficult to speak up because again rape in general or sexual violence in general, it's very difficult to speak up for survivors. Marital rape case, it's the same. It's just your idea comes from, or the entire sort of thinking comes from the fact that women's bodies are to be controlled by men, and marriage sort of gives them the license to control women's bodies, and so that's completely wrong. And also all forms of sexual violence can happen between married couples, and especially intimate partner violence. Nepal, just the country, is very high. Again, I don't want to do the urban-rural divide, but many cases go unreported. Urban centers, mine goes unreported, but based on the studies that I've read, intimate partner violence, man, say it's become so common for men to come raksi khaera rati and to subject women to violence, and to it's sort of perpetuating the submissive behavior from the female spouse, again gaslighting them, manipulating them that men are entitled to do it, and that's what biha गरिसकेपछि गर्न पाउनु पर्छ भन्ने, which is so common. And त्यसमा again, like I said, झन् intimate partner violence लाई चाहिँ strict बनाउनु पर्नेमा चाहिँ अब domestic violence चाहिँ कानुनहरू हामीले हेर्यौँ भने पनि they're not very as strict as अरू कानुन. So त्यो चाहिँ, as you rightly pointed out, that needs to be a longer conversation, and there needs to be even more stricter laws on intimate partner violence, marital rape, any form of sexual violence between spouses. And again, I do want to again reassert that intimate partner violence can happen against men as well.
Yes.
So all forms of sexual violence can happen against men and boys, and sexual violence against men and boys go even more unreported. So it doesn't mean that doesn't happen. So what definitely needs to be understood is rape or sexual violence is not about gender. It is about power. So gender, let's say, it provides the gender because we live in a patriarchal society. So men have more power in general, but there are many different powers that men exercise. When there are more powerful men, there are less powerful men. There are more powerful women, there are less powerful women. So which should be stereotyped as it is a crime by men against women, which is unfortunately what Nepal's law assumes, that rape can only happen by men against women. But it is about, let me again sort of reassert that rape and sexual violence is about power. It's not about gender.
So also to that, I want to add something which I believe you would agree to as well. When we're talking about bringing up provisions, Junmati, we're going to talk about how authoritative figures are not allowed to even get into something that's like that can potentially lead to sexual violence or rape. We've been living in a patriarchal society in which the father, or let's say the male member of the family, is an authoritative figure in himself from the very beginning. So even if these provisions do come, because it's marital rape and marriage is taken as a license or a certificate to like have sex with your wife whenever you want to, the provisions in which an authoritative figure cannot perform something of the sort won't be applied to this, because marriage already comes with an obligation to make babies actually in society. So because of that, there could be instances in which even after the legal provisions are being made in order to prevent sexual violence, cases of marital rape would not preferably like benefit from it, because a lot of things that would be included in the provision would not touch the topic altogether. So that's one thing I really feel like, being in a patriarchal society and somewhere where misogyny exists in a wider spectrum, this could be one of the reasons. And while we're talking about it, there are a lot of cases in which grooming is a concept that has been present evidently, but then they don't realize it. And in Nepal, we're talking about issues that have come in the forefront in the past few days, or let's say from a month maybe, where now people are openly talking about the instances in which they were groomed into doing something that they did not want to, and they did not realize at that time, but they eventually do. And before this, even when some issues would come in the media or reported, they would only address the issue of rape, but the instances of grooming were not much talked about. And it's a proper term. If I, being a law student, what I know is, if I have to describe it, there's a proper term, grooming, which actually refers to shaping oneself, shaping somebody to be potentially your sexual partner afterwards. But then in Nepal, or let's say in a wider society, grooming is taken as a positive sense. It's taken as a positive sense, like we say something like, I groomed her to do something better. So if we or you in general would discuss and tell us something about the term grooming and explain how it is widely used in sexual violence and rape cases that has not been addressed until now, it would be great.
Yeah, I think as you rightly pointed out, this is actually a term. This is actually a form of sexual exploitation and sometimes sexual abuse as well.
Yes.
So sexual exploitation and abuse go sort of category ma pani parcha, but also grooming in itself is a different form of sort of sexual misconduct as well. So you mentioned mentorship, guardianship, you are genuinely maybe trying to help someone, or there's a relationship building process for professional reasons or for work on a joint activity or a joint project. But when done with a sexual intent, so the purpose, if the purpose is clear, surudekhi नै, I want you to be my sexual partner. If the surudekhi नै manipulate nagarikan नै, if the intent has been properly set, and if the other person agrees, then it's different. But the purpose has not been properly communicated. So it's a step-by-step process of gaining trust, providing certain benefits, material benefits, social benefits, economic aru benefits, then sort of gradually building that relationship into then, let's sort of, or the idea of falling in love or being in a relationship, let's be in a relationship. But the purpose of the was sort of the pursue गर्ने. अब हिन्दी मुभिजहरुले एकदम नर्मलाइज गरिदिएको छ यसमा चाहिँ हैन. So pursue गरेर to make them their sexual partners. It's a different case where both of them are working together, there's no intent in the beginning, सुरुमै intent छैन. It's just working together, falling in love, and let's sort of get into a relationship is different. But यस्तो केसमा चाहिँ the intentमै सुरुमा त्यो भएको थियो. And I think I just want to sort of reiterate what you shared. यस्तो केसमा धेरै के हुन्छ भने, and we've seen this recently in a few examples, नेपालको केसमा पनि, the survivor realizes after a long time, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 15 years, we don't know. Because त्यति बेला I thought I was doing it out of my own volition, it was my choice भन्ने हुन्छ. But then you realize that, after the sexual relationship, everything sort of turned sour, or everything turned differently, and then there's this manipulation and gaslighting of, it was your fault. It was your fault that the relationship ended भन्ने भयो. And the person who sort of groomed the survivor had their purpose fulfilled, and they end the relationship, making the survivor feel that it is their fault. So मैले बाहिर पनि एउटा ठुलो ट्रायल पनि भइरहेछ, so यस्तै केसेसहरुमा. So they've been clear cases of grooming, which sort of takes time for survivors to realize that they've been groomed into engaging in sexual act and to engage in sexual partnership with someone. So grooming is very complex in that sense, but from a strictly legal sense, it is about measuring someone's intent at the beginning of the relationship, and also the graph of that relationship, and how the relationship ends, or how the relationship is still continuing, the sexual relationship is still continuing, but there's sort of difference in position of power. So generally मान्छेले के बुझ्छ भने mentor र mentee सँग मात्रै हुन्छ, guardian र अब जो I don't know what's the right word, so guardianship गरिरहेको मान्छेसँग मात्रै हुन्छ भन्ने बुझिन्छ. त्यो मात्र नहुन पनि सक्छ है. So it can be कुनै पनि sort of again position of power पनि कहिले blur हुन्छ. We're same students and एउटै batchको एउटै students भन्ने हुन्छ, but men and women छ, there's power difference त्यहाँ भइहाल्यो नि. So the men obviously benefit from a lot of sort of societal privileges, So त्यो सुरुमै इन्टेन्ट त्यस्तो थियो and which hasn't been communicated. अर्को कुरा एउटा इन्टेन्ट थियो and which hasn't been communicated. So which has been communicated भन्यो भने अर्को कुरा भयो. त्यो communicate भएको छैन clearly भन्यो भने चाहिँ and then it sort of becomes a case of grooming. And unfortunately नेपालको कानुनले यसलाई recognize गरेको छैन. So यसलाई punish नै गर्ने आधार छैन. So at times यसलाई चाहिँ sexual violence सँग interchangeably पनि use गरिरहेको हुन्छ. Again, from a legal perspective, it shouldn't be used interchangeably because यसको evidentiary requirements are फरक छ, intent measure गर्ने तरिका पनि फरक छ, punishment पनि obviously फरकै हुन्छ यसमा. Because त्यो fine line छ के एकदम fine line के छ भने one should not undermine someone's sexuality pani. Oh, you think that women don't know when they're having when they give consent to have sex pani? You think you know it better than us. I know you're trying to control our bodies. You're telling us not to engage in sexual act with someone. You're saying that unsani because that is also not the intent pani, you know. It shouldn't be men or it shouldn't be the law that needs to police women's sexuality pani because त्यो फाइन लाइन हामीले क्रस गर्यो भने देन अगेन अबर्सन पनि कन्ट्रोल गर्यो. अहिले युएसमा हामी त्यही देखिरहेछौँ. सो बडी पुलिसिङ त भयो नि, बडी कन्ट्रोल त भयो नि, वुमेनको सेक्सुअलिटी कन्ट्रोल गर्ने मेकानिजम त भयो नि. सो on the one hand, their agency, which is the best word to use, women's sexual agency must also be respected, but also त्यो intent जुन सुरुदेखि त्यो थियो भन्ने कुरा पनि लाई हेर्नुपर्छ. अनि if the entire purpose was to get that sexual benefit, then that needs to be looked at seriously because that adds to a person's trauma. So I guess the trauma is the other distinguishing factor because generally when women are acting out or men or women are acting out of their own volition to engage in sex, there's no trauma. There's some form of trauma, but there's no lifelong trauma. This is the case, but grooming ko case because they've been manipulated into doing something that they did not have an informed choice of. So this might be trauma on the chances when you want.
So when we're talking about it, one of the ekdam prominent question that a woman gets asked every time she comes in the forefront and she discusses whatever happened to her is त्यति बेला भनेन अहिले आएर भनेर के काम. And of course we have a statute of limitation because of which certain acts over a certain time period पछि भन्यो भने it doesn't actually have a ground in which we can legally take some actions. But then one of the reasons society tries to suppress a woman's voice is saying that there should be an ulterior motive that she has because of which पछि आएर भन्यो. If she was the victim, she should have said on the spot at the right time भन्ने कुरा आउँछ. But then we sometimes tend to forget कि a woman speaking about her issue of violence gives the strength to other women to come up as well. And sometimes it's really good for their mental health and for their trauma and everything because speaking up make them feel less burdened. But then we forget this. And one of the very, very common pattern of a society, if we talk about, is societal gaslighting. If I emphasize on it, if somebody comes, because grooming is something that happens in a workplace, that happens in your school, colleges, and it also happens in your household. We see a lot of instances in which you see a woman getting molested or groomed by her own relatives. It's the elderly, fatherly figure most of the time, and it's also the smaller figures. So when we're talking about if somebody wants to address it or go report it, the family tends to, or the society in general tends to gaslight the woman, and they're trying to suppress her voice because there's societal stigma, there's fear of getting caught, there's a family name that comes in between. And these are the cases, these are the reasons because of which a lot of these cases has not yet been reported on time or not on time. And if you go and ask every other woman, at least once in their lifetime, everybody has faced a certain form of violence, which is a very disturbing thing. But now if somebody comes and tells us that they've been victim of either molested in the bus or a public place or something of that sort, we take it very normally and generally because we see it very, very common, which should not have been what it is. It's very, very sad. So there could be some measures that the society would be able to take in order to encourage these women to come and speak up so that it actually reduces rather than just gaslight them and make them believe like it was their fault or they have to take care of the family name and not speak about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we live in a post-Me Too world.
Yes.
we've seen so many powerful stories of women and also some men as well talking openly about the violence and abuse that they suffered. And there have been many examples of more women and more survivors and more men in general, or more people in general, believing in their stories. But unfortunately, that's not the norm. We still engage in gaslighting, like you mentioned.
Yes.
And just to clarify the meaning of gaslighting, gaslighting is sort of questioning someone's lived realities and making them question their own lived realities, and sort of trying to put the blame on them, to sort of shift the blame on them, the survivor themselves. So that's a common practice that happens with survivors, all kinds of survivors. And like you said, for some people it takes a long time to process that. Some of the cases that I've seen, and there are different kinds of cases. In certain cases, they just want to forget about it.
Yeah.
They just want to forget about it. Like, it happened, I don't want to remember it. I don't want to remember. I want to forget about it. And then same next year, I'm so sorry if this is triggering to anyone, but next year, daytime, if the incident happened in April, next year, April, then the body starts shaking. You don't have any control. And then you get by. Next year happens even more. So then you decide, I want to take action because I can't do this anymore.
Yes.
So that is one kind of case. Katiko case, you ask them repeatedly, nothing happened. Because they want to forget about it. They're just like, Kati case हामीले हेरेको केस होइन भएकै छैन. अनि तपाईँ आउनु भएको थियो अस्ति, सबै कुरा भन्नुभएको थियो त सबै. होइन त्यो त त्यो सपना हो कि त्यो थाहा नै भएन, त्यो म पनि रक्सी खाएको थिएँ, बा होइन. And then after 4 years or 5 years, I cannot live with this lie. I need to do something. भन्ने हुन्छ. कतिको केसमा there are different kinds of cases. कतिको केसमा they try to take action. Lawyer-सँग बोल्यो, they had to relive their trauma. पुलिसमा गयो, they had to relive their trauma. कसैले पनि राम्ररी बोल्दैन त, unfortunately. Very few empathetic lawyers, अब प्रहरीको पनि त्यही नै हो. And then frustrate भएर म गर्न सक्दिनँ, I cannot relive this time and again भन्यो. But after 5 years, they saw the perpetrator. And the body froze again. And then I have to do something. Because then you see that the perpetrator has been doing something similar to other people as well. But again, 5 years basically. So there are so many different kinds of examples. These were just a few examples. Some of them were like, bhayo, like I'm okay. I can do this. I'm a strong woman. I can get by this. I have to think about my family as well, because unfortunately family disrepute ma huncha bhanne dar, which again is a sad reality. It's the for survivor ko family my questions sodincha, survivor ko character my questions sodincha. So it is a conscious choice on their point to not file a case, but then suddenly the perpetrator is using it against the survivor. Your character khatam cha. And then finally no option but to, I guess, file a case. So these are the norms. Yestoहरु चाहिँ norm हो. त्यो केस भयो, अदालत के हस्पिटल जाने, टेस्ट गराउने, एभिडेन्स सबै राख्ने, लयरलाई भेट्ने, and then मुद्दा दर्ता गर्ने, that is not the norm. So if someone is connected with a lawyer, if someone knows the system, NGO हरु पनि चिन्जान छ, family support छ, त्यस्तोको केसमा हुन सक्छ. But that is definitely not the norm. Norm is like generally यो चाहिँ after a few years नै यसको बारेमा realization हुने, or they decide to do that.
So while this is a very sensitive topic and a lot of person would relate to it, when we actually go to report some sort of rape cases or cases of sexual violence, then one of the very basic trauma that we have to live again is the way a police inspector, or let's say the legal authority who is supposed to file the report, the way they behave with a woman or a girl. And not only they have to relive the trauma all over again, but then they get judged for the actions that led to the consequences, because of which a lot of women, they don't prefer to go and say, because you're not only reliving the trauma, but then you also have this feeling of guilt and a feeling of shame that you should not have, because that was not your fault. But then the way the cases are handled legally pani hamro context ma society ko, it's very it's a very sensitive topic, and it's taken ekdamai carelessly. So there should be certain guidelines, I guess, that has to be followed or that should be implemented, because there are not guidelines that have been implemented in order to take the FIR or take the statement of the witness. Neither is the report written in a way. And because of which the way the report is written or the way the inquiry is done is very insensitive to the victim. So there is not much legal guideline that has been provided, or there's not policing. All the policing that happens is on a woman's freedom of sexual intercourse, and not much is done to either the man or to a person who is responsible for providing justice. So do you think there should be a certain guideline that has to be provided in even these institutions, so that women feel secure in order to go and raise their voice against whatever has happened to them and the trauma that it has caused?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of clarity that needs to be there in terms of not just the legal side, the social side as well. I mean, as lawyers, I think we tend to talk more about the law, you know.
Yeah.
It's the law, but the mindset जबसम्म change हुँदैन तबसम्म राम्रो कानुन बनाए पनि it's like all written down on paper. यो हुनुपर्छ, त्यो हुनुपर्छ, त्यो हुनुपर्छ, त्यो हुनुपर्छ. But when the police and the lawyers and the court and judges को mindset is they छोटो लुगा लगायो किन त, किन रक्सी खाएर त्यो केटासँग किन गएको त, तिम्रै गल्ती हो. अब साइबर सेलमा पनि अस्ति यस्तै इन्सिडेन्ट भयो where a survivor sort of try to reach out, यस्तो भयो भनेर भन्दाखेरि किन गएको त त्यसरी राति त्यो समयमा जाने हो त. So त्यो पोलिसिङ गर्ने काम. So because there can't be a law where like this is how specific words you भन्नुपर्छ भन्ने कानुन त बनाउन मिलेन. So it is about changing their mindset, letting them know that sexual awareness, sexual violence ko barema more awareness, power ko barema, the things that we discussed as a so त्यो side of it also needs to go hand in hand with the laws as well. And especially यस्तो cases मा चाहिँ, because it is very traumatizing, even if a survivor decides supportive laws, supportive police, supportive lawyers, supportive judges, supportive legal system, त्यो सबै हुँदा हुँदै पनि if the case is being decided in 3 days, त्यो भयो भने पनि investigation 10 दिनमा सक्यो, suppose everything is all in place, but those 3 days will still be very traumatizing for the survivor. So त्यसको लागि के त, are they getting any psychosocial counseling, are they getting any form of other kinds of support? Is there other cost of investigating about lawyer त अब सरकारवादी मुद्दा हुन्छ, but still are there other costs being sort of there, because medical costs त हुन्छ होला. So त्यो bear गरेछ कि छैन, सरकारले bear गर्ने कि नगर्ने. So त्यो कुरा I think also needs to be covered, and त्यो विषयमा conversation पनि हुन जरुरी छ. It's not just any other crime, it just is a very different form of crime that tends to have a lifelong trauma. So त्यही भएर चाहिँ I think on the one side legal, yes, on the social side मा पनि we need to sort of have more conversations. Curriculum मा सिकाउनु पर्यो सानैदेखि about consent. Education curriculum मा there needs to be massive, अब सरकारले टाइममा अब अहिले चुनावकै बेलामा पनि गर्छ, विभिन्न विषयमा क्याम्पेनहरु गर्छ नि. This needs to be a national campaign as well, again, because at the end of the day NGOs हरुले गर्न सक्ने is only this much. The level of resources छैन कुनै पनि संस्थासँग. It has to be driven by the government with the help of a संस्थाहरु होला, with the help of expertsहरु होला. त्यो नभएसम्म संस्थाहरुले उहाँहरुलाई उजागर गर्ने काम, उहाँहरुलाई प्रेशर गर्ने काम गर्छ होला, but just has to happen on a large scale and has to happen in a very एक हप्ता गर्ने क्याम्पेन सकियो होइन. It has to happen like a year-long campaign or a 2-year-long campaign. So त्यो नभएसम्म अनि at the same side like कानुन पनि बन्नु पर्यो. So कानुन मात्र बनेर चाहिँ हुँदैन. यो legal system like completely change गर्नको लागि there needs to be a really strong campaign. And going back to the topic of gaslighting as well, which I didn't fail to answer. So which is like त्यो भयो भने बल्ल अनि then the perception of society will be अब रेप अक्युज ओ माई गड भन्ने हुन्छ, रेप सर्भाइभर वी आर विथ यु इन सोलिडारिटी. सो त्यो इन्स्टिङ्क्ट सुड कम, द्याट सुड बी इन्स्टिङ्क्टिभ. त्यो इन्स्टिङ्क्टिभ बनाउनको लागि चाहिँ देयर निड्स टु बी अ सोसाइटल ओभरहल विच विल टेक टाइम. बट केही गरेन भने त हुँदैन. तर त्यो सर पर्पसफुल्ली टार्गेटेड वेमा गऱ्यो भने हुन्छ पनि. देयर आर मेनी कन्ट्रिज अब जहाँनिर चाहिँ रेप अक्युज इज ओ माई गड भन्ने हुन्छ, एन्ड देन सर्भाइभर भनेपछि वी आर विथ यु, लेट अस नो वाट वी क्यान डु भन्ने खालको त्यो इन्स्टिङ्क्ट आउँछ. सो वी निड टु सोर्ट अफ स्टार्ट ह्याभिङ दोज कन्भर्सेसन एन्ड ट्राई टु गेट देयर.
So it's not only the police or the authorities or the lawyers or the advocates. There are a lot of cases early, especially because information technology has gotten into every nook and corner of our country in itself. There is a lot of mishandling of data and sensitive informations about rape and sexual violence cases that has been taken by media, and with a lot of it's very easy for somebody to be a journalist nowadays. You just take a certain license, and after that you disseminate a lot of information, and the consumers of these informations through lots of social media like YouTube, Twitter, or we talk about Facebook, it's in bulk early. And at these cases, early you instances ma, the mishandling of very sensitive informations like that of rape or of sexual violence or of intimate partner violence in itself, that has to be, there should be a certain policing that has to be done, because it triggers a lot of people. If I think I'm correct, it does trigger a lot of people, but also it is very unethical. So what is your take on these types of insensitive handling of very sensitive informations on issues that actually had to be disseminated in a certain way that is ethical and safe?
So this is very complicated, and there's no perfect way of doing it, because we take a pros and cons. On the one hand, I guess mainstream media ko lagi this is just a sensationalized गर्ने issue at times. Oh, यो यस्तो खालको इन्सिडेन्ट भयो अनि तपाईको के छ विचार भन्यो, and like prime time news मै आउँछ हैन, and this is like cover हुन्छ के भयो कसो भयो, and then people forget about it. So in these instances we definitely need more independent media and more media that aren't mainstream to keep the conversation going, so that unfortunately in Nepal, because we don't have the institutions, case पढाउनलाई पनि अहिले अब आन्दोलन नगरिकन प्रोटेस्ट नगरिकन केस अगाडि बढ्दैन. सो त्यो प्रेसर जेनेरेट गर्नको लागि पनि मिडिया चाहिन्छ. अनि and all of it at times adds to the trauma of the survivor. अब कति ठाउँमा सर्भाइभरको नाम लिएर रियल नेम युज गरेर पनि क्याम्पेनहरू चलेको अवस्था नेपालमा पनि छ. So त्यति बेला it made the campaign more powerful, but I'm sure it added to the trauma of the survivor as well.
Yes.
And was it survivor's choice to do it? Was the survivor in a state to make that choice? Are questions we don't know the answers to. Right? So यसको perfect answer चाहिँ छैन. But there is that. Again, I don't want to talk. There needs to be, there should be, because there isn't. अब सबै मिडिया अर्गनाइजेसन्सहरूले पनि एथिकली काम गरेर चाहिँ नाम युज नगर्ने, इमेजेस युज नगर्ने, उनीहरूको फ्यामिली मेम्बर्सलाई टाइममा फोन गरेर हैरान गरेर हामीलाई बाइट दिनुहोस् न भनेर नभन्ने, टु बी रेस्पेक्टफुल पनि. सेम विथ एक्टिभिस्ट्स एज वेल, एन्ड इन्क्लुडिङ माइसेल्फ इन दिस. एन्ड हामी पनि वी सुड बी रेस्पेक्टफुल अफ देयर चोइस, अफ देयर हेल्थ एज वेल. सो त्यो अब क्याम्पेन गर्नको लागि, क्याम्पेनले पनि त पपुल्यारिटी, फेम, क्लाउड बढ्ने त हो नि त. सो त्यो गर्नको लागि चाहिँ एउटा सो त्यो सर्भाइभरको इन्ट्रेस्टलाई चाहिँ ध्यानमा नदिने, सो त्यो गर्नु हुँदैन. एथिकली त्यस्तो गर्नुपर्ने हो. बट पुलिसिङ जुन छ होइन, देन पुलिसिङ गर्न थाल्यो भने चाहिँ इफ पावरफुल पिपल आर अक्युज्ड, then they will use all their might to censor all the news about them. So in a way, we need more media houses, independent media houses, to amplify voices. Estoma, if there was a strong guideline where esto information, survivor ko name, family sanga yo confidentiality, unarसँग reach organ ethical guidelines भएको चाहिँ better हुन्थ्यो. तर completely उनीहरूलाई censor गर्नुपर्छ यस्तो इस्युमा चाहिँ सर्टन मिडियाले मात्र दिनुपर्छ भन्ने पनि हुँदैन. सो वी निड टु वक द फाइन लाइन. इट्स भेरी डिफिकल्ट टु फाइन्ड द फाइन लाइन अन दिस. But we I guess hopefully conversation bhairahyo bhane ta we'll find the right balance. So we need to keep engaging in these conversations.
Not only the media, there are a lot of provisions. With time, we've come a long way. Hamro पहिलाको law र अहिलेको lawमा amendments हरु हेर्यो भने there's a lot that has been changed in the field of sexual violence as well as harassment and rape in general. तर there are certain provisions that still need to be amended because a lot of loopholes can be seen. And first, let's talk about the legal provisions on statutory rape and rape, and also the provisions on sexual harassment. And then let's talk about the loopholes that has to be potentially amended in order to strengthen these laws, because what we have is a development on its own from what we had, but there's a long way that we still have to go. So what would you recommend as the solutions that could be actually abided by in order to strengthen these laws in order to prevent such instances and issues of rape or violence or harassment or anything of the sort to happen in the society?
So strictly legal कुरा मात्रै भन्ने हो भने अब I mean, it should be about institutional building, and law obviously plays a big part in institution building. So rape sanga tackle garna, we need to have a strong institution, government institution, non-government institution that provides support to the survivors, that provides swift justice, that respects the confidentiality and the interest of the survivors. So that needs to happen. Law can only play a certain part in it, but law definitely plays a major part in it. So अहिलेको केसमा अहिलेको like major माग पनि त्यही नै छ. अहिले recent sexual violence केसहरू हेर्दाखेरि मेन चाहिँ हदम्याद यो जुन statute of limitation छ, मुद्दा चाहिँ घटना भएको यति मितिभित्र दर्ता गर्नुपर्ने वा उजुरी गर्नुपर्ने भन्ने जुन कानुन छ त्यसलाई चाहिँ हटाउनु पर्छ. सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्सको केसमा मैले त्यत्रो एक्जाम्पल पनि दिइसकेँ किन त्यो हदम्याद काम लाग्दैन भनेर. कति देशले 10 वर्ष, कति देशले 5 वर्ष, कति देशले अनलिमिटेड राख्छ. हाम्रो कन्टेक्स्ट हेऱ्यो भने चाहिँ यो अनलिमिटेडै राख्नुपर्ने सिचुएसन छ.
प्रेजेन्टमा व्हाट इज द स्ट्याट्युट अफ लिमिटेसन?
अहिले 1 वर्ष राखेको छ हैन,
1 year after the age of 18.
आफ्टर यो स्ट्याट्युटरी रेपमा चाहिँ 18 वर्ष पुगेको 1 वर्षभित्र. सो त्यो कारणले नै अहिले अब समस्याहरू आइरहेको देखिन्छ. सो त्यो स्ट्याट्युट अफ लिमिटेसन चाहिँ रेपको सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्सको सबै केसमा चाहिँ हटाउनु पर्छ भन्ने हो है. र अर्को मेजर चेन्ज चाहिँ बर्डन अफ प्रुफ हैन. बर्डन अफ प्रुफ चाहिँ अक्युजमा हुनुपर्छ. अक्युजले चाहिँ आफू इनोसेन्ट हो भन्ने प्रुफ गर्नुपर्छ. कसैले अक्युज गर्यो भने चाहिँ त्यो कारबाही उनीहरूको लागि त्यो अक्युजलाई चाहिँ गर्नुपर्छ. अब यो भन्दैमा ओहो यो भयो भने त रिसिभी पर्छ, महिलाहरूले आजको भोलि अक्युज गर्छन् हामीलाई भनेर धेरै पुरुषहरूले भन्छन्. हो डराउनु पर्यो नि, बल्ल डर हुन्छ नि. बल्ल चाहिँ महिलाहरूले एभ्री डे फेस गर्ने डर कस्तो खालको रहेछ भन्ने अलिकति अब इट इज इनकम्पेरेबल है. महिलाहरूले फेस गर्ने सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्स हुने डर र मलाई अक्युज गर्ला भन्ने डर इज डिफ्रेन्ट हैन. इट्स भेरी डिफ्रेन्ट. लाइफ लङ ट्रमा अक्युज गर्यो अनि अक्युज फुलफिल प्रुफ भएन भने त्यसको नाम क्लियर भयो नि त. तर त्यहाँ सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्स भयो भने त लाइफ लङ ट्रमा छ नि त फेरि त्यहाँनिर हैन. सो अगेन फल्स एक्युजेसन इज एकदमै सानो कुरा भनेर भन्न खोजेको छ हैन. फल्स एक्युजेसन क्यान अल्सो अफेक्ट समवन्स मेन्टल हेल्थ सिभियरली, करियर जान्छ, सबै कुरा छ. बट त्यो एक्युजेसन लाग्ला सानो, आई हेभ टु बी भेरी केयरफुल. सबै फिमेल अरू मेम्बर्सहरूसँग चाहिँ आई हेभ टु मेन्टेन गुड रिलेसनसिप. कुनै मेरो सबै एक्सन्समा चाहिँ आई निड टु बी के बोलिरहेको छु, कतालाई छोइरहेको छु, कसरी कता हेरिरहेको छु, मेरो आँखा कहाँ गइरहेको छ, त्यो सबै कुराहरूमा चाहिँ 1000चोटि सोच्नुपर्ने बाध्य चाहिँ त्यो डर चाहिँ उत्पादन नभइकन सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्स एड्रेस हुँदैन नेपाल जस्तो कन्ट्रीमा. विच सम पिपल थिङ्क इट इज भेरी ऱ्याडिकल. नो टाइम अनुसार भइहाल्छ नि. 15-20 वर्षमा चेन्ज हुन्छ नि त. 15-20 वर्षसम्म महिलाहरू रेप भएर बस्नुपर्ने त त्यतिखेरसम्म. त्यत्रो महिलाहरू चाहिँ लाइफ लङ ट्रमा फेस गर्नुपर्ने त भन्ने. सो सेकेन्ड वान चाहिँ बर्डन प्रुफको कुरा. अर्को सर्भाइभर सपोर्ट सिस्टम. सो कानुनले नै त्यहाँ निर्धारण गर्नै पर्छ. सर्भाइभरलाई छुट्टै सेल्टर होम बनाउने अवस्था हो कि उसलाई सर्टन अर्गनाइजेसनकोसँग कन्ट्याक्ट गराउने, उसको साइको सोसियल सपोर्ट. सो जहिले पनि इट निड्स टु बी रिमेम्बर्ड द्याट इट इज अबाउट द सर्भाइभर. सर्भाइभरले मुद्दा गर्ने भनेर टाइममै मुद्दा भयो, तर सर्भाइभरले चाहिँ मेरो हिलिङ प्रोसेस आई विल ओन्ली हिल इफ द पर्पेट्रेटर्स अपोलोजाइजेस टु मी. भन्यो भने सर्भाइभरको कुरालाई अपोलोजाइज गर्न त्यो इन्भाइरोमेन्ट पनि क्रिएट गर्नुपर्छ होला होइन सो उस सर्भाइभरलाई हिल गर्न के सजिलो हुन्छ सो त्यो त्यसमा चाहिँ अलिकति अध्ययनै गरेर त्यसको मेकानिजमहरू त्यसको इन्स्टिट्युसन बिल्डिङमा चाहिँ काम गर्नुपर्छ तेस्रो कुरा होइन अब चौथो कुरा विच इज अब ग्रुमिङको नयाँ कानुन बन्नुपर्ने भन्ने कुरा त भइहाल्यो होइन अनि स्ट्याट्युटरी रेपमा पनि एज ग्यापको भन्ने कुरा गरेको थियो बट आई थिङ्क अहिले नेपालको केसहरू हेर्दाखेरि चाहिँ we'll have to park that conversation for later. अहिले चाहिँ we have to think about more sort of protectionist approach बाट हेर्नुपर्छ because there have been so many cases. So यो सबै कुराहरू छ I think fast track court is also an example. We have continuous hearing को process छ अहिले नै so निरन्तर सुनवाई हुनुहुन्छ यस्तो केसेसहरूमा तर प्रोसिड्युर्सहरू पनि कति ठाउँमा चाहिँ अलिकति क्विकन गर्न सक्छ अरू मुद्दाहरूलाई भन्दा यो मुद्दालाई प्रायोरिटी दिने हिसाबले सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्सको मुद्दालाई चाहिँ एकदम छिटोभन्दा छिटो प्रायोरिटी दिएर हियरिङ गराउने र छिटो डिसिसन गराउने त्यो खालको कुराहरू चाहिँ यसमा गर्नुपर्छ आई थिङ्क एक दुईवटा कुरा छुट्याइरहेको छु मैले इन टर्म्स अफ लिगल रिफर्म या अल्सो द आइडिया द्याट men and boys cannot be raped भन्ने कुरा पनि
Yes, I was about to get into the point in which we have to अहिलेको कन्टेक्स्टमा जान we have to talk about how men have also become a victim but then नेपालमा लजहरू हेऱ्यो भने there are not actually when we talk about it all our laws that are related to rape or violence is women centric we don't have laws that are going to actually do policing so that it can actually secure men and make them feel safe and there are a lot of cases early male sexual violence company and also male ko rape cases are the one recently that we heard in our own country junma chai the perpetrator could not actually be under a legal obligation is because we did not have a certain law and a lot of cases of manipulation and blackmailing because women have been kept in a certain platform in which they can report because of which male victimहरूलाई पनि victimize गरेको certain cases have come across in the newspapers and in the media but there's not much that has been done so what could be the methods that would be actually be applicable in order to make certain provisions that could actually secure men and their sexual rights as well
Yeah, I think अहिले that's fairly simple यो केसमा चाहिँ जति पनि अब महिला भन्ने शब्द प्रयोग भएको छ त्यसमा चाहिँ व्यक्ति भनेर बनाउनु पर्यो इट क्यान ह्यापन अगेन्स्ट मेन एन्ड बोइज एज वेल भन्ने कुरा क्लियर हुनु पर्यो मेनलाई पनि सेक्सुअल भाइलेन्स गर्न सक्छ वुमेनले पनि वुमेनलाई पनि अगेन नट ट्राइङ टु युज जेन्डर बाइनरी टर्म्स बट अल जेन्डर्स क्यान सोर्ट अफ बी सेक्सुअली अब्युसिभ अगेन्स्ट other genders or their own gender so that needs to be understood again मैले भने जस्तै it is about power it is not about gender sexual violence चाहिँ power difference हुँदाखेरि power imbalance हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ opposition of power हुँदाखेरि हुने chances धेरै हुन्छ there have been so many examples नेपालको केसमा तपाईले भनि नै हाल्नुभयो so many other examples रुवान्डाको केसमा हेर्यो भने there were so many examples अब त्यहाँ genocide हुँदाखेरि हुटु टुट्सीहरुको genocide हुँदाखेरि त्यहाँनिर the dominant group or dominant ethnicity को women were sexually abusive and sexually violent against the abused community. So same with Kosovo ma pani त्यस्तो धेरै भयो conflict cases ma एकदमै धेरै भएको छ non conflict cases ma नि धेरै भएको छ सबै countries को assessment अध्ययन मैले आफैले गर्दाखेरि पनि के देखेको छ भने it's more difficult for men to even talk about it with anyone else.
Yeah.
कोहीसँग पनि कुरा चाहिँ गर्दैनन् एकदमै कम रिपोर्टिङ हुन्छ अनि because it is a process of emasculation where you are suddenly they are trying to take your masculinity away from you.
Yes.
So that is a very difficult process. Like when I read about gender-based violence against or sexual violence against women, I'm never imagining myself in that position. But when I was reading these graphic stories, I was always imagining myself in that particular position and I couldn't properly read the kinds of violence that men suffered and the emasculation that happens where after that they're never the same. Some of them couldn't speak for ever. And so त्यो is also very dangerous and the fact that we don't talk about it means that they just keep living that life without any form of emotional support. कोही साथी and again not comparing women लाई यस्तो हुन्छ men लाई यस्तो हुन्छ भनेर हैन which is incomparable but एउटा क्लोज फ्रेन्डसँग पनि वा कोहीसँग फ्यामिली मेम्बर वा कोहीसँग पनि शेयर गर्न गाह्रो देखिन्छ So this is also a very important topic, especially boys को केसमा सानो उमेरमा 12 वर्ष 13 वर्षदेखि नै केटा ब्रो भन्न सिकाउँछ नि त
Yes.
and then मलाई यस्तो भयो भनेर भन्न नसक्ने सिचुएसनमा when they're supposed to act very strong and सबै कुरा भइरहेछ अनि घरमा every day त्यस्तो भइरहेछ अनि so that is also a very important conversation to have.
A lot of it has also happened to a lot of boys who've been kept in hostels and boarding schools from very, very young, and because they grew in a certain community in which they have been shaped into a certain perspective in which they have to act in a certain way that's regarded as masculine. So even if somebody actually abuses them or grooms them, they don't actually have a sense in which they realize that they've been done that. And when they grow up and become of a certain age, like for instance 18 or 19, and they finally realize whatever had happened to them was wrong, it's not much been filed. It's not much talked about, and it's not been reported as well. And a lot of these things have been happening, but there's not much provisions that have been made because of which these things just remain mum and it's silenced.
True.
So maybe there should be certain laws that has to be specifically made, not only for pedophile but also for all the instances in which these things would happen in general. And हजुरले अघि मेन्सन गर्नुभयो लाइक व्यक्ति भनेर राख्यो भने चाहिँ we are going to address both the gender and also non-binary group of people. But then if there were certain provisions that were made, like for the women, do you think it would bring certain changes that were required additional to the place where we actually keep terms that are neutral to both the genders?
So again, I think my point goes back to institution building and law playing a part in it. त्यही कानुन मात्र भयो भने केही हुँदैन हैन. So we tend to sort of look at it from a very legal perspective,
societal perspective and
societal perspective, and especially feminist perspective. So when I say feminist perspective, power ko perspective बाट. So who's exercising power? The main issue is, okay, law बनाउने कसले बनाउने? Is it a group of men then making the new reform नयाँ law? कसले implement गर्ने? Is it again cisgender heterosexual men who are making the law, implementing the law? Ani so it is about, like, because the wordings matter so much. So power difference, a feminist perspective, when we immediately think about reducing the power differential that there's between men and women and other genders, and there's also difference of power between ethnic groups, there's difference of power between religious groups. The sabai the power difference or the imbalances like कसरी घटाउने. So त्यो is a part of institution building. So कानुन मात्रै बनाउने, it has to be made in a very inclusive way with diverse group members, diverse interests are like ध्यानमा राखेर. So त्यो, like, it's not just the product, okay? The process of having the conversations अब हुन्छ नि कानुन परिवर्तन गर्नको लागि, त्यो is important. So as like I said, as lawyers, we sort of tend to again focus on the substance of the law as opposed to the process, how the law was made and how it would be implemented by the people. So there needs to be a structural change in the people making the laws and people implementing the laws, and sort of त्यो भइसकेपछि मात्रै हुन्छ. And would be great, like, if there's ekdam specific legal provisions and procedures on violence against men and boys, violence against women and girls, violence against gay people, so violence against trans people. So again, like, so त्यो सबै हुँदाखेरि would be great, but again, this confidentiality issue, because trans women are women, trans men are men. So why would you want to distinguish them? Why would the law want to distinguish them? So there we have to be sort of very careful. So violence against non-binary folks, then again, why are you asking them to sort of reveal their gender identity? So, but again, it is important, right? Because the form of violence that happens is different. So, kanunma, in terms of punishment, in terms of procedure, if curriculum, when awareness programs are, when we sort of have these issues, like, you know, it can happen to any gender, So it can happen by any gender and power ko karanle huncha, not because of gender. So the conversation men and boys ma चाहिँ यहाँ फरक हुन्छ, women and girls ma यहाँ फरक हुन्छ, transgender people ma यो फरक हुन्छ, gay people ma यो फरक हुन्छ. त्यो conversation त्यहाँतिर awareness मा भयो भने, as opposed to law मा के law मा चाहिँ भयो भने ए तपाई trans व्यक्ति हुनुहुँदो रहेछ, खै सर्जरी गर्नुभयो, यस्तो छ नि त हाम्रो बुझाइ त हैन. अनि तपाई के हो यो, त्यसो भए त खिल्ली उडाउने, हाँसाउने, अनि केटा बीच पनि यस्तो हुन्छ त रेप भन्ने हुन्छ त. सो कानुनमै हामी लेख्दैपछि त्यो रेपरकसन्स आउने चान्सेसहरु हुन्छ कि त्यो जब एजुकेसन अवेयरनेस जब हुन्छ नि, जब देयर इज अ ह्युज ग्रुप अफ पिपल लाइक oh there should be a separate law for non-binary, there should be a separate law, but so त्यो awareness आइसकेपछि it will be beneficial, it will be helpful. But otherwise policing गर्ने टुल मात्रै भनिदिन्छ कानुनमा हामीले राख्यो भने.
So whatever we've discussed, this could be a separate topic, each of it, and it could be an extensive conversation. But then what we're trying to do right now is at least give an idea to people so that anyone who actually needs it, and also to the people who don't need it for now, there's a general concept which is clear for everybody, so that there's a certain level of education about the legality and also about the social perspective, so that we prosper and we develop our mindset from what we are right now. So is there any message or is there any form of guideline that you want to give to anybody who's been listening to this and who's trying to reach out but does not have a certain idea of how they can do it? So if you could actually guide them or give them a certain guideline which they could actually follow and reach out and have their voice heard, is there something like that you'd want to share with the rest of the audience?
I think hopefully your conversation सुनिसकेपछि वा देखिसकेपछि hopefully they would reflect on this and they would ask these questions to themselves पहिला. So all of us have because we are still learning, I know. Yes. All of us are still learning, and there probably have been instances, मेरो केसमा, so many other people's cases where we've not understood these concepts and have made mistakes. Have not fully understood, maybe not in a sexual violence sense, but in terms of consent, in terms of like asking for help or if offering help, like
yes.
So consent begins from those conversations. Okay, so तिम्रो लागि मैले खानेकुरा ल्याइदिए, मैले खान्छु भनेकै थिएन, हैन तिम्रै लागि गरे, उल्टै रिसाउँछ, झन् ल्याइदिरहेछु झन् उल्टै रिसाउँछ. So that's where like consent, respect bhayira chaina ni ta.
Yes.
Because that's where you normalize not discussing or not respecting other people's consent. So hopefully people will reflect on that. कुन चाहिँ कुरामा चाहिँ हामी consent को बारेमा कुरा गरिरहेका छौं, कुन चाहिँ कुरामा हामी consent लिइरहेको छैनौं, consent लिइरहेको छौं, and hopefully like have more conversations with people who are close to them. Well, it's very difficult to, and sometimes very anxious, it can be anxiety ridden to have this conversation with family members. But if their family members are open to learning and having these discussions, जबसम्म यो डाइनिङ टेबल डिस्कसन हुँदैन तबसम्म परिवर्तन आउन गाह्रो हुन्छ. हाम्रो जेनेरेसनको मान्छे, यङ जेनेरेसनको मान्छेले मात्र छलफल गरेर हुँदैन. It has to go beyond that. So hopefully reflection अलि धेरै होस्, introspection होस्, internalization होस् यो विषयमा. After change, like with many activists, they have this savior complex. Like, I know better. I know what consent is. I know what toxic masculinity is. So you need to listen to me. But fears, all of us are still learning. So हामी आफूमा त्यो परिवर्तन नआएसम्म, हामीले आफैले रिफ्लेक्ट नगरेसम्म, मुख्य कुरा आफूले मिस्टेक्स हामी पक्कै पनि सबैले मिस्टेक्स गरेकै छौं पहिला, अहिले पनि गरिराकै छौं. So त्यो रिफ्लेक्ट नगरेसम्म we can't sort of engage in conversations. So त्यो चाहिँ hopefully there will be more in conversations, more sort of empathetic and reflective conversations after this. त्यही होला last message. लामो भयो अलिकति.
I personally benefited a lot from the conversation, and I hope we bring at least a slightest of a change in the way people perceive it. So thank you again for your time.
I really enjoyed talking about these topics. Thank you.
Tune into Radio Nagarik 96.5 for other episodes of SEXploration, the podcast. The podcast is funded by Right Here Right Now and in association with YUVA, the organization. You can also check our videos on Facebook and YouTube under the name Radio Nagarik 96.5.